When I was first asked to make a contribution this evening, I have to admit I went straight to Google. I had no idea what future-proof meant, and so I typed it in, and instantly, link upon link comes up about how to future-proof your business or future-proof your career. And I stumbled upon a document produced by Microsoft, and this was titled 10 Inspiring Jobs for the Graduates of Tomorrow. And it began with the astounding statistic that 65% of today's students during their working lives will be doing a job that doesn't even exist yet. And they listed some of these: freelance biohackers, body part designers, and my personal favorite, space tour guide. I found myself sat at my computer thinking of one of my favorite films of all time, Blade Runner. It was released before I was born, so I can forgive a number of people in the room for not knowing this film. It's basically set in a dystopian future where genetically modified human beings have been created to go and do work on other planets, and if they come back to Earth, which they're not allowed to do, they get retired by a Blade Runner police unit headed up by Harrison Ford, which basically is a polite way of saying they get shot in the head. Anyway, the reason I'm thinking of this film is because it begins with a cityscape in darkness and these huge towers and flames coming out, and a flying car shoots past and another flying car shoots past, and then it says Los Angeles, November 2019. And I'm thinking of that film and Gattaca and 28 Days Later and 2012, and I'm thinking, you know what? The future terrifies me. Really quite a lot. I don't really know how to even begin to deal with the possibility that the world could be unrecognizable, thankfully, hopefully not in 2019, but near enough. I mean, they didn't get the dates right, but if I think about what's changed in the time I've been on the planet, every home having access to a computer, the internet, mobile phones, social media. It's unrecognizable. I sometimes struggle to relate to my students because they live in a world I can't understand, staying up all night playing computer games with someone on the other side of the planet, not necessarily being able to use the index of a book properly because they're so used to typing a question, just like I did, into Google and immediately getting the answer. Why didn't anybody warn me? And why doesn't anyone warn them that actually change is going to keep coming and get more and more and more significant? Well, the obvious answer is nobody could. 30 years ago, no one could imagine what the world would be like when they were having their children. But we have to deal with it. We have to cope with it. The talks tonight are meant to be from experts about an idea that they believe is worth sharing. So I decided, okay, can I turn my expertise to try and look at this? What do I know? I'm a psychology teacher. Psychology is my degree, my master's, my career. Teaching, education. I know my students. I know I'm a sixth form tutor. I know what they go through over the 2 years that they are doing their A-levels and applying for university. And on a personal level, I know change. Last summer, I came out of a 10-year relationship, had to leave my home, had to leave my gorgeous dog behind, had to buy a new home, and started my new job here at Beech and Cliff. 4 months, 16 weeks. And if you'd said to me and to my friends that I would be standing here tonight doing something that, again, terrifies me, relatively sane, we would have laughed you out the room. But that's when I realized there were 5 things I was doing before all that happened that meant I survived, and not only survived, but got stronger. And I found my talk. 5 tips for future-proofing your mental health to cope with change. At the end of the day, we all think about changing the world, we all think about moving forward, but actually, sometimes we need to start at home. Leo Tolstoy said, "Every man thinks of changing the world, but no man thinks of changing himself." And that is what I'm challenging you to do this evening. So, straight on with it. Tip number 1, When change is coming, embrace it. Take it as an opportunity to shake things up and try something new. And the way you do that, learn about it. Learn everything you can about what is coming, and you will be less afraid of it, less intimidated by it, and better able to cope with it. And there's evidence. Durlach and Wells in 1997 reviewed 177 behaviour programs they were designed to help young people, children, adolescents, and young adults during traumatic experiences in their lives. And they looked at a number of transition programs. Children starting new schools, children with their parents going through divorces, first-time mums. All of these programs included sessions where information was given about how things were going to change and what was going to happen. And all of those programs had a positive outcome for the people that were involved. Last summer, when I suddenly realised I needed to know about mortgages, internet providers, energy suppliers, and how on earth to travel abroad on my own, those list of things alone would normally completely overwhelm me and intimidate me. And instead, I sat down, I made a list, and I started reading. And I coped. So, learn about the change that is coming. You will deal with it better. Kind of feeds into point number 2. Read a book. Yes, reading for knowledge is important. It helps us gain better understanding. But reading fiction helps us understand people. And reading is more than that. When we read a book, we completely accept that we're about to go into a completely different world from our own lives, sometimes vastly different, and we enjoy it. So we need to harness that acceptance of change and use it in real life. And that's not the only thing that reading does. BOP Consulting, in conjunction with the Reading Agency in 2015, looked at the beneficial effects of reading for pleasure, recreational reading, beyond the literacy benefits. You can see behind me on this graphic the number of things it positively impacts. Just to pick out a few: parent-child communication, empathy, relaxation, and perhaps the real clinchers: reduction in stress, reduction in depression symptoms, and reduction in dementia symptoms as well. All significant. Reading is good for your mental health. Last summer, I needed the escape. I needed time to turn my head off and go somewhere else. I didn't want to read new books because everything was too new and too changing already. I went to my old favourites. So I read most of the Harry Potters because, you know, I am still a kid. I then read The Martian by Andy Weir and Dune by Frank Herbert. Vastly different worlds, but the familiar characters were comforting. And when I got to the end of it, I felt better, I felt rejuvenated and ready to come out and deal with all the new stuff again. If you read in your everyday life, then when you need it to be an escape, it will. So, find a book, read it. Number 3, maintain a support network. I'm convinced one of the only reasons I'm still standing here today is because I talked the ears off my friends last summer. They just sat there and smiled and nodded, but, you know, that's all you need sometimes. There is a very well-established area of research in this called the stress buffering hypothesis. This is the idea that social resources help ameliorate the potentially harmful effects of a stressful event. And more than that, the idea that social interaction during major life changes and transitions makes you feel valued, makes you feel cared for, and so you feel better able to cope with it. Interestingly, it's not the help that you go and ask for that makes the difference. It's the everyday social interactions. Okay? So what we mean by that is when someone comes up to you and has that conversation, "Oh, how are you?" And you go with the classic British response of, "I'm fine," when underneath, you're really not. Well, those interactions are the ones that will make the biggest difference for your mental health. And it is awkward starting those conversations at the beginning. It's really uncomfortable. But if while the going is good, you find someone who you can talk with easily and comfortably, then maybe when that person comes up to you on that day and says, "How are you?" you actually feel comfortable enough to go, "You know what, actually, not so good." And then you've started that conversation and you have that support. So future-proof yourself by keeping your social network active when the times are good. so that when the times are bad, you can turn on it for help. Another one that we know plenty about is the beneficial effects of exercise. It makes us fitter, makes us stronger, makes us sleep better. All of these things are good for us. But in particular, exercise has a very positive effect on self-esteem. And if you feel good about yourself, you feel like you can have an impact on the world around you, that you have some kind of control, that you can cope and make a difference. Dr. Kenneth Fox, who's based over at the University of Bristol, reviewed all the literature and confirmed what we probably all knew, that exercise has a positive effect on self-esteem, on self-identity, and perception of physical self. Now, looking back, I had good weeks and bad weeks last summer. And it was only when I was writing this talk that I realized the good weeks were the weeks where I was getting exercise. I swam. I rode my bike, admittedly to the pub or to a coffee shop where I inevitably ate cake, but I did ride my bike. I even tried running, but the jury is still really out on how I feel about running. I'm not sure. I wasn't doing it regularly. I wasn't doing it as much as I should, but on the weeks I did, I felt better, and they were, looking back, my good weeks. So the advice is 30 minutes of exercise 5 days a week. You look down that advice, the things that count as exercise are brilliant. Going for a walk, cleaning the house. You'd think it would make my house cleaner, but it hasn't so far. But it doesn't have to be Ironmans and marathons. It can literally be taking the dog out. Just get some exercise, be active, because it will make you mentally more healthy, and then you will cope better with change. Last one's my personal demon. Switch off. It is far more healthy to accept that you are unique than to spend all your time constantly comparing yourself to someone else. And the way we do that now is social media. Everyone projects their perfect little life. You don't see the messy stuff. And then you're comparing yourself to that. And it makes you feel worse. Actually, it's not even just social media that's the problem. I think this is terrifying. This study looked at 4,000 20 to 24-year-olds over a one-year period. At the beginning of the year, they asked them about their mobile phone use. And at the end of the year, they looked at various mental health outcomes. Those who were displaying high-frequency mobile phone use were significantly more likely to have negative mental health outcomes. I wrote some of them down. Stress, sleep disturbances, depression, anxiety, for men and for women after adjusting for relationship status, educational level, and occupation. And high-frequency mobile phone use? 11 or more texts or calls a day. 11. I'm willing to bet everybody under 30 in this room gets more than that. It's not good for you. Put it down, turn it off. And it's not even just the communication side of it, right? You think you're harmlessly scrolling down looking at videos of cats on YouTube. Guilty. That's not good for you either. A year later, looking at people that were doing that. Reduced mental health outcomes. Now, I'm not saying for a second this one's going to be easy. I was addicted. I literally had to be trained, like you train a small dog or a child, to not use my phone. I had to be constantly praised for not standing there, vastly increasing the muscular capacity of my left thumb. It took me a long time. I can now actually leave my phone in another room. It's in the office down there. I haven't even got it with me. But it took a long time. But once I got off it, I started to feel better. And then I noticed something else, which means there's kind of a tip 5B. Get outside. Barton and Pretty showed that every green environment you can imagine has a positive effect on your mental health. Even better if there's water, so you can now go home and tell your parents you need a garden pond. And the biggest effect on the youngest participants. We need to get outside, get off our phones, be in the moment, not behind a screen taking a photograph of it. And then we will be mentally more healthy. I put it to you that if you go and you do these 5 things now, while things are okay, then when things start to get tough, when things start to get difficult, you will cope with it better. I'm here now doing this under a year out from the biggest period of change I could ever imagine in my entire life. And not only am I sane and here, I'm stronger and better than I was before, and I put it down to those 5 things. So try it. What have you got to lose?